Hi, and welcome to the second hour of this Wednesday edition of Focal Point, first day of our fifth year broadcasting here on the Focal Point program. Again, a word of thanks to those who called in yesterday just to express congratulations on our 4 years of broadcasting. We're launching into the fifth here today and glad to have you on board. Rob, let's I want to play clips 3, 4, and 5 here in this next segment. There is a scholar by the name of Robert Oscar Lopez. I've referred to his writings before. In fact, he's got a piece that I want to get to at some point talking about same-sex parenting being a form of child abuse. I've said this for a number of years now, been pilloried by the left for it. I still maintain that same-sex parenting is a form of child abuse. We know from the Mark Regnera study at the University of Texas the complications that take place in the life of a child that's raised in a same-sex environment. We know the cost of a missing mom or a missing dad. We know from social research that they're essential. Both mom and a dad are absolutely essential to the optimal development of children. When one of them's missing, it harms children. It injures children. And if you have same-sex adoption, you are deliberately creating households with a missing mother or a missing father. And I'm saying no compassionate society, no society that cares about children would ever do that to a vulnerable young child. It's a form of child abuse. They're not in a position to be able to handle the tensions and the pressures that come. And one of the things that Robert Oscar Lopez said in his last piece, which I hope to get to maybe tomorrow, is that one of the parts that make same-sex parenting abusive is these children are taught that they're supposed to like what's going on, that this is good, this is healthy. They're supposed to put on a happy face. They're not allowed to express any pain. They're not allowed to express any heartache. They're not allowed to express any angst over the missing mother in their lives or the missing father in their lives. That's not allowed. And so there's another form of child abuse where they are never allowed to deal with or to express some of the pain that's involved in growing up in a suboptimal environment. Now, Robert Oscar Lopez grew up raised by two lesbians. So when he talks about it being a form of child abuse, he can speak with authority. He's been there. He got very heavily involved in the homosexual lifestyle. He is now married with a child. He is happily married. He is faithfully married, making it very, very clear that sexual orientation, you're not born that way. You're not locked in. Change, transformation is perfectly possible. And so he has been writing on this topic about the hazards of same-sex parenting. And he said, it's an interesting thing. This is clip 3, where he talks about the fact that there are two kinds of homosexuals. And this is important to understand. There are the hyper-masculine homosexuals, and then there are effeminate homosexuals. I've talked about this before. Hitler's stormtroopers, virtually all of them were hyper-masculine homosexuals, very aggressive. They were willing to be as brutal as necessary to enforce the wishes of the Führer. Now, the homosexuals that were persecuted in Nazi Germany, and there were homosexuals that were sent to concentration camps. They were the effeminate homosexuals, the soft homosexuals, and the masculine homosexuals that made up the SS and surrounded Hitler. They despised effeminate homosexuals. And so they persecuted them, they harassed them, they rounded them up and sent them off to concentration camps. Now, listen to this. Robert Oscar Lopez saying, look, with the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, we are now making room in our military for these hyper-aggressive, masculine homosexuals, and that represents a real threat to the United States military. Let's listen.
What the gay community has to confront now is that there are a layer of men, I'm going to speak about the male community, there is a layer of men that before would not have come out, that now is coming out, and I think that they're bringing different issues that I think the gay community hasn't really dealt with. So, for instance, the sexual assault problems, a lot of the problems with eating disorders, a lot of the problem, because there's such an emphasis now on celebrating these masculine men who are coming out who before would have lived closeted lives, people like Jason Collins. But the thing about it is that a masculine man who is very proud of being a man and who wants to only be with other men, that brings in a whole other layer of aggressiveness and misogyny and all of these things that I think the gay community has to deal with. They have to confront that. And I dealt with that in the Army in particular because I was in the Army when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was being debated, and I said from the beginning of that debate that this is going to lead to a sexual assault problem, because the gay men that I came across in the Army were very different from the gay men that I knew living in New York in predominantly gay communities. The gay men in the Army are very drawn to masculinity, and their sexuality is very aggressive. It can feel very imposing, and there's an element of fear and of power in it that the gay community has to deal with now. That didn't exist before, because a lot of those very aggressive masculine men before, due to stigma, would not have
come out. So the point that Robert Oscar Lopez makes, we have now opened the door to the same kind of aggressive, hyper-masculine homosexuals that surrounded Hitler. Am I saying that they're Hitler? Am I saying that they're the SS? No, I am not. I am saying that Robert Oscar Lopez is saying that by repealing the ban on open homosexuality in the military, we have opened the door to the same kind of aggressive homosexuals that surrounded Adolf Hitler. And Lopez says we are creating the increasing likelihood that we are going to have more and more male-on-male sexual assaults. We already know that more males are victims of sexual assault in the military right now than females. There are more males in the military that are victims of sexual assault than females. We know this from information statistics released by the Department of Defense. Now, let's squeeze in one more soundbite here. This is on the research. You've heard people talking about the research that supports same-sex parenting. Same-sex parenting is just fine. Kids do just as well with same-sex parents as under any other arrangement. And he talks about the fallacies, the flaws in that kind of research. Let's listen.
If you take a look at the studies that were done, if you look at, for instance, an excellent article by Lauren Marks that came out in Social Science Research last year, where he basically eviscerated the legitimacy of the social science consensus that said that same-sex parenting was okay. If you look at the research upon which that pro-same-sex parenting consensus was based, it withers almost immediately. They were measuring short-term impacts. They used very vague criteria. The criteria were carefully crafted to arrive at the conclusion that gay and lesbian people are okay. They used biased samples. They told the parents what the research was about, and they recruited the children through the parents. So the parents basically, almost in an abusive sense, controlled what the children were telling the researchers. And there were no outside observers who were third parties, who weren't emotionally invested in the politics, who could really speak to what the impact of that kind of upbringing was.
So Robert Oscar Lopez, and we'll play a soundbite on the other side of the break, talking about the difficulty in getting honest research about same-sex parenting into the public because of the culture of intimidation that exists. But you heard him just eliminate all of this research that supports same-sex parenting because they were biased, very self-selective. You have people volunteering for this. You have children that are coached to say the things that the researchers want to hear. It's not objective. And this is in contrast to the research that Mark Regnerus did at the University of Texas, where he talked to adults who were now independent adults and had been raised, at least for a time, in same-sex environments. Much more honest, much more objective, much more thorough. Back in 2, stay with us.